My name is Tom Kenny, and I'm here to talk to you today about a short story called Anish. It's a science fiction story, and to be honest, it's not really my field. I'm in communications, so this video is more my field than the short story actually was. And if you think I'm looking like a sailor, it is slightly on theme. It also just happens to be cold in Canada, where I live, inside of an igloo. As promised, I will deliver a summary of this short story to fulfill the requirements for an assignment as quick as physically possible, because this is a very low quality, low budget, because there is none, video just for the purposes of this assignment. Now, I will make it as in-depth as possible, but let's not waste each other's time. I'm not an expert. You're probably not an expert. So let's talk about a horrid working environment with psychological constraints and consequences. Anish by Peter Watts, a story about protagonist Lenny Clark, who works on BB Station, or Beeb Station, or Bebe Station, located 3,000 meters beneath the surface of the ocean, just above the Earth's crust, at a location called the Dragon's Throat, because of all of the geothermal energy being released there. Her responsibility to help ensure that that station continues to harvest this energy for use above the ocean itself, so societal uses. She works with a secondary character called Janet Ballard, or Ballard, as she is referred to for the vast majority of the story. Their relationship is something that I would call tense. Both of these individuals have undergone significant bodily modification just to survive at these incredible depths. And it haunts Clark for the story, just the depth of it, not the bodily modifications. She's, concerned at first, confused. What has she become? Why has she done this to herself? Why is she here? This is a very prevalent question throughout the entirety of the short story. And you're constantly reminded of the depths that they're at by the creaking and cracking and concerns placed around the integrity of the hull of the station, as I like to call it. I think it sounds funnier. Two individuals placed at incredible depths who have both undergone significant bodily modification just to work here. Not exactly what most would call a dream job. But this relates to the title of the short story, Anish. Whoa, who'da thunk it? And you begin to see a lot of character evolution and growth, even from the first few pages of the story. Clark meets Ballard as they're about to exit the station to check the outer workings of everything, make sure things are safe on the ocean's crust, as well as the exterior of the hull. And they go through an airlock which Clark describes as something that is suffocating her, choking her, and as it releases, it's like being dropped from a gallows out beneath her. This is our first real glimpse but I promised a low budget video, low production quality video, so I'm going to keep it that way. We're not going to edit that out. This is our first glimpse at Lenny Clark as a main character. She drifts and floats and finds herself being attacked by an enormous fish. Fish down at this depth, apparently in the short story, grow to incredible sizes, huge sizes. But because of the lack of nutrition, they're very fragile at the same time. Most of them carnivorous, because one latches onto Lenny's arm and begins trying to tear it out of her socket. Ballard comes to her rescue, stabs the fish several times, and it falls to the surface of the ocean, I would assume, unless it gets eaten by a bunch of other smaller fish on its way down. Who could say? I can't. This provides us with our first real insight into Lenny's character. She is emotionless, reactionless. She has her own knife to defend herself, but she opts not to. She basically thinks to herself, if the fish is going to kill me, might as well do it already. She just doesn't react to this sort of aggression. Ballard takes her on board, harangues her about her lack of fight, why she would just give up, and Clark kind of walks it off. An important difference between the two characters. Clark never takes off really her external gear, her skin, as it's called in the book. She has eye caps for her eyes, and Ballard does. Ballard doesn't live in her outfit, whereas Clark certainly does. And as the story progresses, there are a few things you learn more about the aquatic life. The fish are attracted to bioluminescence because it's incredibly dark down here, and anything that lights out must be food. Station emits light, an incredible amount of light. So very often fish are slamming themselves into the hull of their station as they work. This provides background noise and concern for the characters throughout the entire story, but never ends up being a huge issue. Clark feels trapped inside of this station, but feels free when she leaves. As I said, we begin to see evolution very early on. Very quickly, Clark transitions from an individual who feels like a gallows is swinging out from underneath them when she first leaves the airlock, to a person who becomes free when she leaves, like being born anew. She enjoys drifting through the darkness, and in fact, very early on, she attempts to find out just how far she can go before there is no more light, which is, again, something that relates to her character and can be, if you're artistic enough, drawn to it, but it's an opinion thing, right? As all interpretations are, and we'll get to that in just a second. And now we have contention between our two characters on Bebe Station or Beeb Station. I genuinely don't know how it's pronounced, and I profusely apologize if I'm doing it wrong. It's spelled B-E-E-B-E. BB? BB? But I don't want to call it something like BB, because then Star Wars fans might get on my case about BB-8, and that's not a can of worms I want to open. Alright? The movies are decent. I digress. This isn't about Star Wars, this is about Peter Watt's Anish. And we're getting close to why it's called Anish. You see, as the story progresses, Clark becomes more and more like the aquatic life that surrounds this deep, dark Bebe Station. And Ballard begins to notice it more and more and more, and they're trapped in this station together, just the two of them, surrounded by mirrors. And if I didn't make it clear early on about the mirrors, there are mirrors everywhere in this station. It is noted very early on. And the fact that Clark becomes more comfortable outside than she does inside bothers Ballard significantly, because the outside is so dangerous, it's so dark, it's so scary, and they do not work together well at all. And Ballard begins to suspect that Clark is just losing her mind, that nothing is right. And they get word that another station somewhere recently had conflict between the two crew members manning it, near the Galapagos, I believe. And one of those crew members was hurt very badly, and they don't know what happened to the other. This is also very important for the story. So the two parties, Ballard and Clark, separate more and more and more as the story progresses. And an important question is brought up by Clark's inner thinking, and that is that being in this scenario that they are in, 3,000 meters below the surface of the waters of the ocean, and trapped inside this mirror-filled cubbyhole of a station, changes a person. It begins to change how people act and feel. And she believes that the person being most affected by this is Ballard. And Ballard believes the person being changed is Clark. Now, this brings us to the crux of the story. What really happens? Early on, Clark questions why she's here, and Ballard begins to question it as well because of how separated they've become and the dangers that Clark, through her unwillingness, her unmotivated nature to assist, to take action against aggression, has exposed them to incredible dangers. So they sit down, and Ballard starts to question everything. Question Clark, question why they're there. She brings up the fact that it's an experimentation. The effects that they have, that the environment that they're in has on their psyche, how it changes a person. It's not just the modifications that they made to them, the cyberpunk-ish body mods that allow them to live and breathe water, that allow them to swim 3,000 meters beneath the surface. It is more about how a person changes based on their environment. No matter who you are above, it is the circumstances you're in changes you. But the important part of all this, more important than that question that is posed very poetically by Watts, is that Ballard notes it's an experiment. She figures it out. There are subtle clues here and there about how when she walks into the cot, Clark walks into Ballard's cot, her cubby room, as it's described in the book. There is a towel over the mirror. Almost immediately afterwards, we figure out why. Ballard goes into the common area near the, I guess it would be the hull, not the hull, the bridge, I guess you could call it, and shatters the large mirror inside of there. And there are dozens of cameras, dozens and dozens and dozens of cameras, proving her correct. They have been watching. The people who sent them down there are just trying to find the perfect type of person to work in this horrific environment. And that's when you discover the truth of it all. The type of person they were looking for isn't a perfectionist, isn't a person who's incredible at their job, a person who's caring. A person like Ballard. It is a person who is emotionless, who is cold, and who is willing to live and breathe the environment they're in that they're looking for. The person they're looking for is Clark. We begin to learn things about Clark because of the conflict that she has with Ballard. We learn that Clark, as a girl, was raped by her father, and learned then that it's easier to give up and not fight back than it is to get beaten and have it happen anyways. She'd rather just get it over with, which explains her behaviors, which explains her emotionlessness, her unwillingness to fight back when conflict arises. Example being early on when she gets mauled by a fish, nearly tears out her arm. This also leads to conflict between our two characters because Clark realizes that this is why who she is and that she's always stayed the same, and then this once again reinforces her idea that Ballard is the one being changed by their current living environment. So Clark decides to take it out on Ballard, this new pent-up rage, anger, and beats Ballard to the point where she has to leave. As Ballard begins to leave, we get introduced to Clark's newest partner. This partner, however, is not a green foot to the organization. This partner, this new individual whom she will be working with, was one of the individuals in the Galapagos station who was part of the violence that caused someone to leave there as well. Though it is not the person who got hurt, it is the person who committed the act of violence. This is Lubin, or Lubin. I'd rather not call it Lubin because then it sounds like he's dirtier than he actually is. The fact of the matter is his personality is probably very similar to that of Clark's. Cold, distant, and it makes them perfect for this type of job. The type of people who prefer to be outside amongst the scaly creatures that dwell beneath the depths than with other people. That's why it's called a niche, because it is a niche. They weren't looking for people who were good people. They were looking for people who were different, who could adjust and conform to their environments. And thus we have Clark, who never takes off her outer gear, who resembles as much of an alien creature as anything else, now working alongside another individual who is the exact same way. So, while Ballard was right, the environment did begin to change her. It began to lead her to question things. It led her to the truth, and the truth was that this job was not for her, and the people it was for are dangerous, and those people are cold and distant and belong 3,000 meters beneath the ocean. Sorry that took a turn, guys. I hope that your stories were hopefully more exciting, more optimistic, less dark, but hey, if it wasn't, cheers. We made it through it, and hopefully we don't have to make more videos like this.